Hey everyone, it's MK. Welcome back to MK Quilts and this installment of Tip of the Week. So this week we're going to continue to talk about pantos and repositioning. Now, if you have watched me for any length of time here in the group or on YouTube, you probably have picked up on the fact that I reposition my pantos in a slightly different way. When I am stitching through a panto, and let's just say it looks similar to the one on the screen, as I am stitching through these rows and advancing my quilt, I do not reposition by using the drag and drop feature. So the first thing about this video is I want to mention that all of my techniques surrounding building pantos and the way that I position is all in my best practices for pantos video. But for the sake of tip of the week, let me just go through very quickly what a reposition in my world might look like. So on the screen, we've got a panto that is created to fit our quilt. Okay, so use a little bit of your imagination. This quilt is approximately 40 by 55. You've set up this pantograph in the number of rows that fit the quilt. Now, side note, that's not how I do it, but let's just go with this scenario for right now. And let's just pretend that we are getting towards the end of this pass. So this is a cropped pass. This is the first full pass. So just so that we don't have to watch this run the whole way across, let me just let this panto stitch to the end of the pass. Let's just assume that we are now going to let the machine travel across the quilt back over to the next start point. Okay, so we would clip our threads over here and we would let the machine run across to the next start point. Assuming we have our pull-up turned on, which I do, the machine is going to go across to the next start point and it's going to do a needle down and a needle up. Now, in my world, you guys, what I would have done, and let me zoom in right here, what I would have done is where the machine went down and up, pulled up my bobbin thread, I would have put a pin in the quilt right there because that shows me where my next start point is going to be when I advance. Okay, so let's refresh. Because I can't obviously show a pin in the quilt in simulation, you're just going to have to pretend that there's a pin in the quilt or in the batting right there. Now it's time to advance. So again, you have to do a little bit of imagining. Advance. Now remember, I did not go to any sort of modify reposition with drag and drop. In my world, I would have just moved the machine out of the way and I would have just advanced. And as I advance, the pin would go with the quilt. Then what I would do when I'm ready to start stitching again is I would have determined which row I was on. So remember, we had stitched that row, we had stitched that row, and it was beginning of this third pass that we were ready to stitch. So I might have gone to Pro Stitcher, New Start and End, made sure that I was on the beginning of that third pass. I would have moved my machine into position wherever that pin moved to, and let's just pretend for the sake of class, let's pretend that the pin was all the way up here, right? Because we had advanced. So I would have put my machine back in position over the pin, modify, reposition on start point. And let's just refresh so that we can see everything. Now, whether or not you leave the area box turned on or whether or not you leave the area box actually open, it doesn't really matter. And just for today, it kind of gets in our way with what I'm trying to show you. So I'm just going to go ahead and clear the area. Okay, so we had gotten ourselves repositioned on start point. That is basically, you guys, how I advance through a quilt. So today's tip centers around all of these start points along the left-hand side of your panto. Let's get ourselves back to the first start point and let's go through a very, very simple way that you can always make sure that you can find yourself to the start point. Now, one thing about the start points in my example, other than this cropped row, my start points on every row are at the topmost part of the pattern. Now, that's just for this example. Sometimes that's not the case. But for what I'm about to show you, as long as your machine is not going to hit your rail, you can do this pre-marking tip with your start points. So let's pretend that you're at your quilt now and you are ready to stitch. And we are also going to assume that you've already done your positioning, done your repeating. Everything is set and ready to go. Before you ever start stitching, the first thing you should do, obviously, is save this. The next thing that you're going to do before you start stitching is you are going to pre-mark these start points. As many start points as you can fit in your throat depth, you're going to mark them with a marker. Now, having said that you're going to mark that with a marker, I want to make a pretty big disclaimer here. You need to be very careful that when you're using any sort of a marking tool, that you're not going to drop it or get it onto your quilt. So we are assuming that we're putting this mark out into our batting, okay? Now, you may be able to use some sort of a friction marker so that if you do drop that on your quilt, it's not that big of a deal because you can use the heat of an iron to get rid of it. However, friction marking pens, even the marker versions of friction, don't always show up real well in the batting. So I am referring to an actual marker that you would use and put a mark in your batting. Okay, disclaimer over, we're back to our quilt. We are positioned, we're ready to stitch. However, we're going to go ahead and mark these spots first so that we don't worry about where they're going to be when we advance. The first starting point we don't really have to mark because that one's already set. Let's go ahead and mark the first full pass. Okay, we're going to go to Pro Stitcher, New Start and End, and we're going to jump our start circle down to that first full pass. We are going to make sure that that start point is not hitting our rail. So if this is the top of our quilt, we can pretty much assume that, but just for the sake of always erring on the side of caution, grab your machine, pull it down towards your rail, so down this way, and make sure that you can get to the start point. If you can, you're going to just let your machine run to the start point. It's going to do needle down, needle up, and if you have the pull-up auto turned on, it's going to move over to the right-hand side. You're going to go ahead and hit cancel. You're going to go ahead and pull up your bobbin thread. If your machine is in the way, you're going to move your machine out of the way while you hold your bobbin thread. And you're going to put a marker mark in your batting right at that spot. All right, let's go ahead and mark the next spot. Again, assuming that you can get yourself to that start point. So once again, grab your machine, come down towards your rail. If you can get yourself to that start point without hitting your rail, you're going to go Pro Stitcher, New Start and End. You're going to jump ahead one start circle. You're going to let your machine run to that start point. You're in the batting, needle down, needle up. Your machine moves over if you have pull-up auto turned on. You're going to hit cancel. You're going to move your machine while you hold your bobbin thread so that you can put a marker mark in your quilt right there. Now, depending on the throat depth of your machine, you're probably going to be able to mark at least one or two start points. If you have an infinity or maybe even a forte, you're going to be able to mark maybe one extra. Now, before you start, you have 1, 2, and maybe even 3 spots pre-marked so that when you advance, they're going to be there. You're not going to be worried about getting yourself repositioned. You've built yourself some insurance. Now, obviously, you guys, if you have jumped your start circle through these start points, before you start stitching, you are going to want to make sure that you jump it back to the start. Pro Stitcher, new start and end. Jump it backwards and go ahead and start stitching. Okay, you guys, this is a very, very simple step, especially for newbies. I find that beginner Pro Stitcher users, probably one of their biggest fears is they can get themselves set up. They can repeat their panto. They can start stitching. But there's always a little bit of anxiety surrounding the fact of what if something happens in the middle of this? Or what if I get ready to advance and I lose my spot? Or what if I have to close down for the night? How am I going to find my spot again? There's just so much anxiety surrounding the reposition factor that if you give yourself the spots before you even start stitching, that should alleviate a bit of that worry. Okay, that was an awful lot to digest just by using simulation. So why don't I go ahead and take you to the quilt. I'm actually working on a quilt right now where I'm using this Panto, and it's called Fleur de Plumes, and I got it at Urban Elements. So let me take you on over to the quilt and let me show you these steps at the machine.
All right, so here we are at the quilt. I'm going to pull the phone in a little bit closer so that you can see, and then I'm going to walk you through these steps at the quilt, and we're going to be very careful with that permanent marker. All right, so here we are at the quilt, and it's really a beautiful, very simple quilt with some beautiful fabrics by Tula Pink. And there you see a little bit of the Panto that I'm using sneaking out from the previous pass. Over there, my machine is sitting in position. There was a little pin marking my start point. And if we zoom up here on the screen, you're gonna see there's my Panto, and I've already repositioned this Panto on that first start point up there in the top. Now the first difference that you're going to notice from what you're seeing on the screen to what you saw in the simulation portion of this is that I only set up my pantos to the number of passes that's going to fit in my throat depth. Okay, all of that again, you guys, is explained in my pantos video. All right, so what I'm going to do so that you can see is I'm going to move my machine out of the way a little bit, and I'm going to turn off the bounds box so that you can see my start points along the left-hand side. So what that is going to correlate to is this area out into the batting along the left-hand side of my quilt. So again, where my machine is sitting is where I've already repositioned for the next pass. Okay, so I've already advanced. I'm set for the next pass. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come under Pro Stitcher, New Start and End, and I'm going to jump down one start point. As we said in the video, grab the machine, make sure you're not hitting your rail. I am not. And now I'm going to just go ahead and run the machine. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the phone down because, again, I'm doing this one-handed here today, and I apologize about the light reflecting up above. I tried to turn the lights off as best as I could. But I'm going to put the phone down. I'm going to let the machine run down, do a needle down, needle up, and then I'll pop the phone into the tripod again so that you can see me do these steps here out in the batting. All right, here we go. I've gone ahead and turned the lights off on my Forte so that hopefully you can see this. Okay, so I'd already jumped down to that next start point. I'm going to go ahead and check my pull-ups. So, yep, I've got the pull-up and the pull-up auto turned on. So now I can just go ahead and run. and the machine will go down, needle up. I'm just going to go ahead and hit cancel, and very carefully with my permanent Sharpie marker, I'm going to come in at the quilt from the side so that I don't make any sort of a error and drop it on the quilt, and I just put a black dot in the batting right where my thread came up. Okay, I'm going to come back to my machine. I know you can't see this, but you can refer back to the video from the screen capture. I'm once again going to Pro Stitcher, New Start and End. I'm jumping down one. I'm grabbing my machine, making sure that I'm not hitting my rail. I am clear of the rail. So once again, I'm just going to run and let the machine do its needle up, needle down. And that time I didn't catch the bobbin thread, so I'm going to just run again. There we go. Now I caught it. Just hit cancel, move the machine away. Right there is where the bobbin thread came up, and I'm just going to go ahead and put a little black dot there. And I have one more pass that I think I can get to. So again, you probably can't see this on the screen, but I'm doing Pro Stitcher, New Start and End. I'm jumping down one more jump start, or start point rather. I'm pulling my machine down towards the rail. Now I'm getting very close to my rail, but I can still make it to one more start point. So I'm going to, one last time, I'm going to let the machine run. It's going down to the last start point that I can make. I'm hitting cancel, move the machine out of the way. Here's my bobbin thread. I'm going to put a little dot right there in the batting. Now let me grab the camera and bring you in closer so that you can see. Okay, so here we are back at the quilt. I still have my pin in the quilt right there, or in the batting rather. That's going to be my first pass. This is going to be my next pass, and this is going to be my final pass. I'm pretty sure that this pass right here is getting pretty close to the rail. This pass right here is going to be the last one that I'm going to be able to stitch. But it's helpful to have that one so that when I advance, that is the start point that I'm going to go back to. So there you have it. Now you guys, I do want to mention that this little trick that I just showed you today, it's not necessarily how I reposition. I just know that I can get myself to start points and I don't need to mark them ahead of time. But what did I mention in the video? For new people, it might be very helpful for you to get those start points marked before you ever start stitching. That way, you will know that you have them, and if whatever happens, you can just reboot, pull that pattern up, get your start circle back to a start point, match that start point up with whatever dot you have put in the batting, and now you are back into position. Now, you might need to find your way along the pattern to a spot where you left off or ran out of thread or whatever happened. But that start point, that is the key. And you guys, if I have said it once, I have said it 1,000 times. Once you understand start points, you will really not fear repositioning or getting out of position or rebooting or closing down for the night. All of the fear of repositioning will be gone because you always know you can reposition on a start point. For the full instructions on Panto's The MK Way, check out mkquilts.com, the video training tab, and rent the best practices for Panto's in premium. And then you can see the whole way that I set up Panto's in simulation, the way that I connect them in Art and Stitch, all of that stuff that I do here in my studio that you might want to adopt in yours. Okay, you guys, until next time, from my studio to yours, happy quilting. Bye-bye.